At 9:23 in the morning on September 21, 2001, Belén Montes arrived at her office. This office was located at Bolling Air Force Base in Washington, District of Columbia. She carried her briefcase as usual. She greeted her colleagues. Then she sat down at her desk with a coffee. All seemed normal. She was 44 years old. She had 16 years with the Defense Intelligence Agency. She held a top-secret, sensitive compartmented information clearance. As the senior analyst for Cuban affairs, she was the Pentagon's go-to expert on everything Cuba. She had been scheduled to brief military commanders about the planned invasion of Afghanistan the next day. America was still reeling from the September 11 attacks, which had occurred 10 days earlier. The nation needed every intelligence officer focused on the war ahead. Montes would never make that briefing. At 10:15 in the morning, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Steve McCoy walked into her office with 3 colleagues. Defense Intelligence Agency counterintelligence investigator Scott Carmichael was with them. They had been watching her for months. They had followed her. They searched her apartment. They intercepted her communications. Slowly, they built a case, piece by piece. McCoy addressed Montes directly. He informed her that she was under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage. The Queen of Cuba's reign was over. For 17 years, Montes had operated as a mole inside America's intelligence establishment. She spied not for money, nor for blackmail. She spied for ideology. She believed the United States was wrong about Cuba. She believed Fidel Castro was right. Therefore, she gave Havana everything. This included the names of 4 undercover American intelligence officers working in Cuba. She also revealed the identities of 450 United States intelligence personnel working on Latin American issues. Furthermore, she disclosed details about a top-secret satellite surveillance program. She also shared military contingency plans, special forces operations, and electronic intelligence capabilities. She betrayed all of it. This continued for 17 years. During this time, her brother worked as a Federal Bureau of Investigation special agent hunting spies. Her sister worked as a Federal Bureau of Investigation translator helping catch Cuban agents. Meanwhile, her colleagues considered her the smartest Cuba analyst in the United States government. In 1994, she passed a polygraph test. The Cubans had trained her how to do this. They taught her to strategically tense her sphincter muscles during control questions. This created a false baseline. It made deception look like truth. It worked. The polygraph indicated she was clean. The Defense Intelligence Agency believed its results. Subsequently, Montes kept spying. The damage was catastrophic. Intelligence officials would later call her one of the most destructive spies in American history. Her betrayal crippled United States intelligence operations in Cuba for over 1 decade. She gave Castro advance warning of covert operations. She distorted intelligence assessments to make Cuba look less threatening. She also identified American agents who then disappeared into Cuban prisons. For 17 years, nobody suspected the brilliant, passionate, and dedicated Cuba expert was working for the other side. This is how she did it. This is how they caught her. Her name deserves to be remembered alongside Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen. These individuals are considered some of the great traitors in American intelligence history. Belén Montes was born on February 28, 1957. Her birth took place at the United States Army Hospital in Nuremberg, West Germany. Her father, Alberto Montes, was a United States Army psychiatrist and physician. He was a colonel who served his country for years. Her mother, Amelia, was a homemaker devoted to raising 4 children in a patriotic military family. Anna was the oldest child. She was brilliant, intense, and had perfect grades and perfect behavior. Her younger sister Lucy would later join the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a translator. Her brother Tito would become a Federal Bureau of Investigation special agent. Another sister would work in public health. This was not a family of traitors. They moved frequently, as military families often do. They lived in Puerto Rico, Kansas, and Maryland. Anna attended the University of Virginia, graduating in 1979 with a degree in foreign affairs. She spoke fluent Spanish. She loved literature. Furthermore, she cared deeply about social justice. After college, she moved to Puerto Rico and worked at the Justice Department as a clerk. This is where everything began to change. Ana Montes, 27 years old, held a clerical position at the Department of Justice in Washington District of Columbia. She spoke openly and passionately against Reagan administration policies in Central America. She opposed United States support for right-wing governments. She also opposed military aid to anti-communist rebels. She believed American imperialism was destroying Latin America. Her opinions were not secret. She voiced them at work. She shared them at social gatherings. She spoke to anyone who would listen. Someone was listening. Cuban intelligence had been running recruitment operations in the United States for decades. The Cuban intelligence service, known as the Dirección de Inteligencia, or DI, was aggressive, sophisticated, and patient. They did not just recruit mercenaries. They recruited believers. These were true believers, people who would spy not for money, but for the cause. Ana Montes was perfect. A Cuban intelligence officer approached her in 1984. This officer was possibly posing as a Cuban official or academic. The exact circumstances remain classified. What is known is that they appealed to her ideology. They told her she could help Cuba. They said she could help the oppressed. She could fight American imperialism from the inside. In December 1984, Ana Montes made her decision. She agreed to spy for Cuba. She spied not for money, but for principle. She genuinely believed Cuba was the victim and America the aggressor. She genuinely believed that giving classified American secrets to Havana was an act of conscience. The Cubans gave her a mission. This mission was to get inside United States intelligence. The Defense Intelligence Agency was the target. The Defense Intelligence Agency produced intelligence assessments for the Pentagon. It provided these for military commanders and for the Secretary of Defense. If Montes could secure a job there, especially one focused on Cuba, she would gain access to America's most sensitive intelligence about the island nation. She applied. The Defense Intelligence Agency hired her as an analyst in September 1985. By the time she walked through the doors at Bolling Air Force Base for her first day of work, Ana Montes was already a fully recruited Cuban spy. In March 1985, Ana Montes met her Cuban handler for the first time in the United States. This was 4 months before she started at the Defense Intelligence Agency. The exact location is unknown. The details of what transpired are not. They did not train her in Cuba, as that would be too obvious. They trained her in the United States. This likely occurred in safe houses, during brief meetings, and in short bursts of instruction. They taught her tradecraft and espionage techniques. She learned how to memorize information instead of copying it. She also learned how to communicate using encrypted disks. They showed her how to receive messages via shortwave radio. She mastered conducting surveillance detection routes, servicing dead drops, and beating the polygraph. This sphincter muscle technique would save her career. They explained it carefully. During a polygraph, the examiner asks control questions to establish a baseline. For instance, questions like, "Is your name Anna?" or "Are you 27 years old?" would be asked. Your body responds truthfully to these, maintaining a steady heart rate, normal blood pressure, and regular breathing. This truthful response establishes the baseline. Then, the examiner asks important questions. These include inquiries about unauthorized contact with foreign intelligence. They also ask if classified information was provided to unauthorized persons. If an individual is lying, their body reacts with a spiking heart rate and rising blood pressure. The polygraph then catches this physiological stress response. The countermeasure involved artificially elevating responses during control questions. One could tense their sphincter muscles, bite their tongue, or press a toe against a shoe. This makes the body react to simple truth questions. This reaction establishes a false baseline. Then, when the real questions come, the body's responses do not look different. The Cubans taught Montes this technique in 1985. She would not need it for 9 more years. But when the time came, it would work perfectly. The Cubans also gave her equipment. This included a Toshiba laptop computer loaded with encryption software. She received a Sony shortwave radio to receive coded messages. She was given a handwritten cipher key hidden in the lining of a notebook. There were also floppy disks to pass encrypted intelligence to her handler. Additionally, they gave her a code name, Agent Blue Wren. In September 1985, Ana Montes began work at the Defense Intelligence Agency. She started as an entry-level analyst with a low-level clearance at first. However, she was smart, driven, and passionate about her work. She studied Cuba obsessively. She read everything. She analyzed every report. She wrote brilliant assessments. Her supervisors noticed. She received promotions and more responsibility. She gained higher clearance levels. By the late 1980s, she was working on Cuba full-time. By the early 1990s, she was the senior analyst for Cuban affairs. She had top secret, sensitive compartmented information clearance. She had access to special access programs. This included access to signals intelligence, human intelligence, and military plans. Her colleagues called her the Queen of Cuba. They considered her the smartest Cuba expert in the United States government. She was the analyst everyone consulted. She was also the briefer who presented to generals and cabinet secretaries. Every night, she went home and betrayed everything she had learned. The method was elegant, simple, and almost impossible to detect. Montes never took documents out of the building. There were no papers in her briefcase. There were no files on floppy disks. She had no printouts hidden in her purse. Nothing physical could be discovered during a random bag search or a security check. She memorized everything. She possessed a photographic memory and extraordinary recall. She would read a classified document about a special forces operation in Latin America. She memorized the key details. These included names, dates, locations, and unit designations. She went home that evening and typed it all up on her Toshiba laptop. She would then encrypt the file using the Cuban software. She transferred it to a floppy disk. She erased the file from the laptop's hard drive. Then she hid the disk. Once or twice a month, and sometimes more frequently during crises, Montes would turn on her Sony shortwave radio at home. This happened late at night, after 10 in the evening. She would tune to a specific frequency and listen. The broadcast came from Cuba. These were shortwave transmissions sent from Havana. They consisted of encrypted messages read in monotone Spanish. The messages contained numbers, often strings of 5-digit groups. These were meaningless to anyone without the decryption key. Montes had the key. It was written on a small sheet of paper hidden in the lining of one of her notebooks. She would listen to the numbers and write them down. Then she decrypted them using her cipher. The messages gave her instructions. These included where to meet her handler. They also specified what intelligence Cuba wanted. She learned when to make contact. They also provided emergency protocols if she felt surveilled. After a meeting was arranged, Montes would conduct a surveillance detection route. This was a carefully planned series of seemingly random movements. Its purpose was to reveal if anyone was following her. She would leave her apartment in Cleveland Park. This quiet residential neighborhood was in Northwest Washington. She drove to a metro station and parked. Then she took the subway several stops. After getting off, she walked through a department store. She made sure to exit a different door. Next, she took a bus and got off. She walked several blocks and entered a restaurant. She then left through the back. Afterward, she took another metro line. She would switch cars and get off at a station. She walked a few more blocks. Finally, she would double back. She watched carefully for repeated faces or cars. This elaborate process ensured she was not followed. If she saw nothing suspicious, she proceeded to the meeting site. Sometimes the meeting was in a park. Other times, it was in a restaurant. Public restrooms and shopping malls were also used. The specific location varied, but the procedure remained consistent. She would carry the encrypted floppy disk in her purse or pocket. Her Cuban handler would be waiting. They would exchange disks. Hers contained United States intelligence. His disk contained new instructions. Sometimes it had new encryption software, or questions from Havana. The meetings lasted only minutes. They would last for 5 minutes at maximum. They involved brief eye contact and a few words in Spanish. The two would exchange items, then walk away. Montes would return home by a different route. This involved another surveillance detection run. This involved more subways, more buses, and more walking. Then she would decrypt the disk she had received. She read the new instructions. She deleted the files and hid the disk. The cycle would then repeat. This went on for 17 years. Montes passed her first intelligence to Cuba. This was low-level information at first. She was proving herself. She was demonstrating access. Montes showed the Cubans they had recruited a real asset with true potential. Montes provided information about a United States intelligence officer working undercover in Cuba. The officer's activities were compromised. The operation failed. Cuba's counterintelligence knew exactly what to look for, thanks to Montes. Montes revealed details about United States signals intelligence collection against Cuba. This included how the National Security Agency intercepted Cuban military communications. She shared information about specific frequencies, equipment, and methods. Cuba then changed its procedures. As a result, American intelligence went dark for months. Montes passed information about a United States Special Forces training exercise in Latin America. The operation aimed to train Allied forces to resist Cuban infiltration. Cuba knew everything about it. The operation's value was destroyed before it even began. Montes provided details about United States military contingency plans for Cuba. This included what would happen if Castro fell. She revealed how the United States military would respond to a Cuban missile crisis. This also included where American forces would deploy and what targets they would strike. Cuba adjusted its own military plans accordingly. A routine polygraph examination was scheduled. The Defense Intelligence Agency's security office selected Montes for this routine polygraph examination. All intelligence analysts underwent periodic polygraphs. This was a random selection and a standard procedure. There was nothing to worry about if one was innocent. Montes was not innocent. She had been spying for 9 years. She had compromised countless operations. She had identified intelligence officers working undercover. She had given Cuba the United States military secrets. Now, she had to pass a lie detector test. The Cubans had trained her for this moment. She practiced tensing her sphincter muscle. This created a false baseline. She made the control questions look like stress. She made the real questions look normal. The examination took place at a Defense Intelligence Agency facility. Montes sat in a chair. Sensors attached to her fingers monitored her physiological responses. A blood pressure cuff was on her arm. Pneumograph tubes were around her chest and abdomen. Every physiological response was monitored. This included heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and skin conductivity. The examiner asked control questions. He asked if her name was Ana Montes. He asked if she worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. He also asked if she was 37 years old. Montes tensed her sphincter muscles with each answer. Her body reacted with an elevated heart rate and increased blood pressure. The polygraph recorded these reactions. The examiner saw them. This established a baseline of heightened physiological response, even to simple truth questions. Then came the real questions. The examiner asked if she had had unauthorized contact with foreign intelligence services. He asked if she had provided classified information to unauthorized persons. He also asked if she was concealing any security violations. Montes answered no. She spoke truthfully and calmly. Her body's responses looked the same as they did for the control. Questions. There was no significant difference. No deception was indicated. The polygraph showed no deception. The examiner wrote that the subject passed. Montes walked out and went back to work. She resumed spying for 7 more years. The technique worked perfectly. On February 24, 1996, the Brothers to the Rescue shootdown occurred. Brothers to the Rescue was a Miami-based humanitarian organization. Cuban exiles flew small planes over the Florida Straits. They searched for Cuban refugees fleeing Castro's regime. They would spot rafts, radio the Coast Guard, and save lives. Cuba hated the group. They saw them as provocateurs and violators of Cuban airspace. They considered them Central Intelligence Agency fronts. On February 24, 1996, 2 Brothers to the Rescue Cessna aircraft flew near Cuban airspace. Cuban MiG-29 fighters scrambled. They intercepted the planes. Both aircraft were shot down in international airspace. 4 men died in the incident. President Clinton condemned the act. The United Nations also condemned it. The incident created a diplomatic crisis. The United States needed to respond. Military options were carefully considered. The Pentagon needed its best Cuba analyst. She was to brief senior officials about Cuban military capabilities. The briefing also covered Cuban intentions and likely responses to American retaliation. They turned to Ana Montes. She briefed Defense Secretary William Perry. She briefed Joint Chiefs of Staff officers. She provided assessments of Cuban air defenses, military readiness, and Castro's decision-making process. Her assessments were brilliant, detailed, and authoritative. They were also shaped by Cuban intelligence. Montes knew what Cuba wanted the Pentagon to think. She knew what information would make United States military action look too risky. She also knew how to frame intelligence to support Cuba's interests, and she did exactly that. The United States response was diplomatic, not military. It included sanctions and condemnations. There was no invasion and no airstrikes. This was exactly what Cuba wanted. Ana Montes had been briefing senior Pentagon officials. All the while, she was working for the Cuban government. Nobody knew her true allegiances. After the shootdown, Montes's Cuban handler broke protocol. The crisis was too important. He needed to meet her urgently. He could not wait for their normal schedule. One day, on a Washington street, the handler saw Montes walking. He flagged her down on a public street. This was an emergency meeting, highly unusual and highly risky. They spoke briefly. He needed to know what the Pentagon was planning. She told him. He gave her new instructions. They separated. It was a violation of tradecraft. The handler was desperate. However, it worked. Cuba received the intelligence it needed to navigate the crisis. The meeting was never detected, but someone was starting to wonder about Ana Montes. Scott Carmichael was a Defense Intelligence Agency counterintelligence officer. He was methodical and persistent. He was not the flashiest investigator, but he was thorough. He had a reputation as someone who did not let things go. In 1996, shortly after the Brothers to the Rescue shootdown, Carmichael heard something concerning. A colleague mentioned that Ana Montes had asked unusual questions. She wanted to know about classified programs she did not need to know about. She was curious about things outside her areas of responsibility. Carmichael filed this information away. It was not enough for an investigation. It was just something to remember. Later that year, another colleague approached Carmichael with a gut feeling. The colleague had worked with Montes on Cuba issues. Something felt strange. Her views were too pro-Cuban. She was too dismissive of Cuban threats. She was too quick to defend Castro. Carmichael interviewed Montes in November 1996. It was a friendly conversation with no accusations. The questions focused on her views on Cuba, her analytical methodology, and her sources. Montes was brilliant, articulate, and passionate. She explained that her job was to provide objective analysis. She maintained this was true even if it conflicted with policy preferences. She defended her assessments as based on evidence, not ideology. Carmichael could not find anything wrong. He wrote up the interview. He filed it. Then he moved on. But he did not forget. In September 2000, 4 years later, Carmichael was in a meeting with Federal Bureau of Investigation counterintelligence officers. They mentioned they were investigating a leak. Classified information was reaching Cuba. They knew there was a penetration somewhere in the intelligence community. However, they did not know who it was. They used the term unknown subject, or unsub. They described the intelligence that had been compromised. This included information about United States military plans. It also involved signals, intelligence, and undercover officers. Carmichael remembered his 1996 interview with Belén Montes. He mentioned her name to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation checked. Montes had the right access. She had the right clearances. She held the right position. She fit the profile. They opened an investigation into her. The Federal Bureau of Investigation did not rush. They watched and waited. They built a case carefully and methodically. This involved physical surveillance and electronic surveillance. They also collected her trash. They reviewed credit card records and her travel history. Agents attempted to identify her handler. They also tried to catch her in the act. The surveillance began in late 2000 and continued through 2001. They followed her. They observed her leave work. They watched her drive home to her apartment in Cleveland Park. Sometimes she went to restaurants. Sometimes she visited friends. Sometimes she took complicated routes home. This included using the metro, bus, and walking back and forth. These were surveillance detection runs. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately recognized these behaviors. It was trained counter-surveillance. This was not the behavior of an innocent analyst. They obtained a warrant to search her apartment while she was at work. This was known as a black bag job. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents entered her home with Defense Intelligence Agency security officers. They searched everything carefully. They left no trace. They found the Sony shortwave radio. It was a high-end model. It was capable of receiving international broadcasts. They found the Toshiba laptop. It was an old model with encryption software installed. They found floppy disks containing encrypted files. They found the cipher sheet. It was hidden in the lining of a notebook. It was handwritten. This was the key to decrypt Cuban intelligence communications. They photographed everything and took samples. They left everything exactly as they found it. Then they exited the apartment. Montes never knew they had been there. The Federal Bureau of Investigation now had physical evidence. However, they wanted more. They wanted to catch her passing information to her handler. They wanted to identify the handler. They wanted to arrest both of them together. So, they kept watching. In May 2001, the Federal Bureau of Investigation briefed Defense Intelligence Agency officials about the investigation. Belén Montes was a Cuban spy. The evidence was strong. They were preparing for an arrest, but not yet. The Defense Intelligence Agency was shocked. Their best Cuba analyst. Their go-to expert. The Queen of Cuba. She was a traitor. The Defense Intelligence Agency began planning for her arrest. They considered what to do about ongoing operations she knew about. They assessed what intelligence to assume was compromised. They also determined how to assess the damage. The Federal Bureau of Investigation continued surveillance through the spring and summer of 2001. Then, September 11 happened. At 8:46 ante-meridiem on September 11, 2001, American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At 9:03 ante-meridiem, United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower. At 9:37 ante-meridiem, American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon. At 10:03 ante-meridiem, United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania. This happened after passengers fought back against hijackers. 2,977 people died. America was at war. The Pentagon immediately began planning military responses. This included Afghanistan, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Osama bin Laden. Military commanders needed intelligence assessments. They needed to know about Afghan geography, Pakistani cooperation, and Central Asian bases. They also started thinking about other targets. This included Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Cuba. They considered if Cuba was involved. They also wondered if other terrorist groups were planning attacks. Military action might be needed elsewhere. Ana Montes, as a senior Cuba analyst, would be involved in those discussions. She would have access to war plans. This included invasion plans, special operations, and sensitive sources. She would know everything. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Defense Intelligence Agency made a decision. They could not risk it. They could not let her have access to war planning while she was a Cuban spy. The national security stakes were too high. They decided they would arrest her now. This was before she could brief anyone about Afghanistan. This was also before she learned anything more about United States military plans. The arrest was scheduled for September 21, 2001. This was 10 days after September 11. On September 21, 2001, at 9:23 ante-meridiem, Ana Montes arrived at her office at Bolling Air Force Base. She did not know the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been watching her apartment all night. She did not know that Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Steve McCoy and a team of agents were already in the building. She did not know that Scott Carmichael had been waiting years for this moment. At 10:15 ante-meridiem, McCoy walked into Montes's office. 3 agents were with him. Scott Carmichael was behind them. McCoy stated her name, asking, "Ana Montes?" She looked up and saw the Federal Bureau of Investigation credentials. In that moment, she knew. McCoy told her she was under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage. Montes did not resist. She did not run. She did not act surprised. She stood and put her hands behind her back. She let them handcuff her. She said nothing. The agents walked her out of the building. Colleagues watched in shock. The Queen of Cuba was in handcuffs. She was being led away by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nobody could believe it. They took her to Federal Bureau of Investigation headquarters. She was led to an interview room with a video camera recording. McCoy and other agents began the interrogation. Montes waited for her lawyer. She said nothing at first, but eventually, she talked. She admitted everything. Yes, she spied for Cuba. Yes, she gave them classified information. She had been providing classified information. Yes, she had been doing it since 1985. This continued for 16 years. The investigators asked why. She told them that she obeyed her conscience rather than the law. She explained her ideology. She disagreed with United States policy toward Cuba, believing the United States embargo was cruel. She believed American imperialism was wrong. She saw Cuba as the victim. Therefore, she helped the Cuban government. The Federal Bureau of Investigation asked about 4 undercover intelligence officers. They questioned if she revealed their identities. Yes, she did. She gave Cuba the names of 4 United States intelligence officers working undercover in Cuba. She did not know what happened to those officers, and she did not ask. She was asked how many intelligence personnel she identified. She identified approximately 450 United States intelligence officers working on Latin American issues. This included their names, positions, and assignments. She revealed everything about them. They then questioned her about a satellite program. She told Cuba about a top-secret United States signals intelligence satellite program. This program was used to intercept communications. She disclosed its capabilities, orbits, and frequencies. She gave them all the details. She also revealed information about Special Forces operations. Yes, she did. She passed details about United States Special Forces activities in Latin America. This included training exercises, deployment plans, and unit compositions. Next, they asked about military contingency plans. Yes, she passed those as well. These included war plans for Cuba and how American forces would respond to various scenarios. She detailed what the United States would do if Castro fell. This also included specific targets and strategies. She provided all information about these plans. The Federal Bureau of Investigation agents took notes. This involved hours of interviews and days of interrogation. Montes never showed remorse. She never apologized or admitted she was wrong. She claimed she did what her conscience demanded, and that was her consistent position. She stated she would do it again. The Federal Bureau of Investigation thoroughly searched her apartment. They seized the shortwave radio, the laptop, the cipher sheet, and the floppy disks. They also took her notebooks. Agents confiscated everything. The encryption software on the laptop was issued by the Cuban intelligence service. It was custom software. This software was not commercially available. This provided proof of her Cuban handler's support. The cipher sheet contained handwritten number sequences and letter substitutions. It was the key to decrypt shortwave radio messages from Havana. This proved she was receiving instructions. The floppy disks contained encrypted files. Some of these files were successfully decrypted. They contained classified United States intelligence reports. These were word-for-word copies of classified Defense Intelligence Agency assessments. This proved she was stealing secrets. The case against her was airtight. The damage assessment began immediately. Defense Intelligence Agency and Federal Bureau of Investigation. Counterintelligence teams spent months evaluating what Montes compromised. They reviewed every classified program she had access to. They also reviewed every operation, every source, and every assessment she wrote. They analyzed every briefing she gave. The extent of the damage was staggering. 450 United States intelligence officers were identified to Cuba. Their names, assignments, and cover identities were all revealed. Cuba now knew who was working on Cuban operations. This allowed Cuba to know who to watch, who to avoid, and who to target. Specifically, 4 undercover United States intelligence officers working in Cuba were identified. Their true names, cover identities, and missions were all given to Cuban counterintelligence. The question remained, what happened to them? The Federal Bureau of Investigation never confirmed their fate. Cuba never admitted what happened. Undercover officers exposed to hostile intelligence services typically face arrest, interrogation, imprisonment, or worse consequences. The 4 officers Montes betrayed likely suffered severe consequences. The exact details remain classified. A top-secret United States satellite intelligence program was revealed. The program intercepted Cuban military communications. Montes told Cuba how the satellite worked. She also revealed what frequencies it monitored and how to avoid detection. Consequently, Cuba changed its procedures. American intelligence lost crucial access. United States Special Forces operations in Latin America were compromised. These included training exercises and counterinsurgency programs. Montes passed these details to Cuba, which then shared them with its allies. Many operations were compromised. Plans had to be changed. Millions of dollars and many years of planning were wasted. United States military contingency plans for Cuba were exposed. These included invasion plans, naval blockade procedures, and airstrike targets. Montes essentially gave Cuba the American playbook. She exposed every scenario American military planners had developed. Cuba knew exactly what the United States would do in any crisis. Analytical assessments were significantly distorted. For 16 years, Montes wrote intelligence reports about Cuba. These reports shaped United States policy. She consistently downplayed Cuban threats and defended Castro's government. She influenced Pentagon thinking in ways favorable to Cuba. Her analysis was trusted, but it was profoundly wrong. The estimated value of compromised intelligence was incalculable. The cost to rebuild intelligence networks in Cuba amounted to tens of millions of dollars and many years of effort. The strategic advantage Cuba gained was significant. Cuba knew what the United States knew. It also knew what the United States planned. Furthermore, it knew how to counter American intelligence operations. Ana Montes was one of the most damaging spies in American history. Remarkably, she never made a single cent from her espionage. The Federal Bureau of Investigation agents interviewed her extensively about money. They asked if Cuba paid her. She replied no. She accepted no money for her espionage. She was not motivated by greed. Instead, she spied for ideology and for principle. Her belief was that Cuba was right and America was wrong. Cuba reimbursed her for some expenses. These included travel costs to meetings with her handler and equipment purchases. This amounted to perhaps a few $1,000s over 16 years. It was not even enough to be called payment. These were simply operational expenses. She was not Aldrich Ames, who spied for $2.7 million. She was not Robert Hansen, who spied for $1.4 million. Ana Montes was an ideological spy. She was a true believer. This made her the most dangerous kind of spy. One cannot turn an ideological spy. One cannot offer them a deal. One cannot appeal to their greed or their fear. They believe they are doing the right thing. Ana Montes believed she was on the right side of history. On March 19, 2002, Ana Belén Montes appeared in United States District Court in Washington, District of Columbia. She pleaded guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit espionage. This was under 18 United States Code Section 794. The charge carried a maximum sentence of life in prison. There was no trial, no jury, and no public airing of the intelligence she compromised. National security required secrecy in this case. The plea deal avoided exposing more classified information in open court proceedings. On October 16, 2002, United States District Judge Ricardo Urbina sentenced her. Judge Urbina spoke about the severity of her betrayal. He stated that her criminal conduct was characterized by a degree of calculation, deliberateness, and moral failure that was utterly incomprehensible. He told Montes that she had betrayed her country and placed the nation as a whole in harm's way. Her conduct had a devastating impact on the country. He sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison. She also received $41,000 in fines. He ordered the forfeiture of any assets she gained from espionage. She would face supervised release for 5 years after her prison term ended. Montes showed no emotion. She stood calmly. When given a chance to speak, she did so. She repeated that she obeyed her conscience rather than the law. She stated that she believed the government's policy toward Cuba was cruel and unfair. She felt morally obligated to help Cuba defend itself. She believed the United States was imposing its values and political system on Cuba. She offered no apology and expressed no regret. She gave no acknowledgement that she had betrayed her country, endangered intelligence officers, or damaged national security. She was assigned to Federal Medical Center Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas. It was a high-security prison. It also served as a medical facility for female inmates. She would serve her time there. Ana Montes, prisoner number 25037-016, began her sentence. Her brother Tito Montes, a Federal Bureau of Investigation special agent, was devastated. He had spent his career catching spies and criminals. His own sister was one of them. The betrayal was personal, professional, and unbearable. Her sister Lucy Montes, a Federal Bureau of Investigation translator, felt the same. She had helped investigate Cuban spy rings. She had worked counterintelligence operations against Cuban agents. She had never suspected her own sister. The family was shattered. Their father, a former Army colonel, was humiliated. Their mother was heartbroken. Lucy later spoke publicly about the betrayal. She stated that Montes had betrayed her family, all her friends, and her country. Ana showed no remorse, even toward her family. In her mind, she had done the right thing. Inside Federal Medical Center Carswell, Montes settled into prison life. She worked in the prison library. She read extensively and wrote letters. She maintained her belief that she had been right to spy. She gave one interview from prison in 2012 to a journalist. She remained unrepentant. She stated that she was glad she did what she did. Furthermore, she affirmed that she would do it again. She never cooperated fully with the damage assessment. She answered some questions and confirmed some details. However, she never provided a complete accounting of everything she passed to Cuba. She protected her handlers. She also protected the Cuban intelligence service. Even from prison, she maintained her loyalty to Cuba. Intelligence officials continued the damage assessment for years. They were trying to identify every operation she compromised, every person she endangered, and every secret she revealed. The full extent of the damage remains classified. In prison, Montes remained isolated from the general population much of the time. This isolation was not punitive, but protective. She had been a Cuban spy. Other inmates might target her. Therefore, prison officials kept her separated for her own safety. She maintained correspondence with supporters. Some people viewed her as a political prisoner. They saw her as a victim of unjust United States policy toward Cuba. They also viewed her as a hero who had stood up to American imperialism. However, most Americans and most intelligence professionals saw her as a traitor. The years passed. 2002 became 2010. Then 2010 became 2020. Montes aged in prison. There was no early release and no parole. Federal sentences do not have parole. She would serve almost her entire sentence. On January 6, 2023, after 20 years and 4 months in prison, Ana Belén Montes was released. She was 65 years old. Federal law allowed her release slightly before the full 25-year sentence. This was due to good behavior credits. She moved to Puerto Rico. She was under federal supervision. This supervision would last for 5 years of supervised release. She had to report regularly to a probation officer. She could not leave Puerto Rico without permission. She could not have contact with Cuban intelligence. She could not access classified information ever again. She gave a few interviews after her release. She remained unrepentant. She stated that she did what she had to do based on her own conscience. She added that she did not see herself as a traitor. Instead, she viewed herself as someone who acted in accordance with her deepest principles. She expressed no regret for the intelligence officers she had exposed. She offered no apology to her family. She gave no acknowledgement that she had been wrong. In Puerto Rico, she lives quietly. She works part-time, reportedly as a bookstore clerk. She attends community events. Some Puerto Rican activists celebrate her as a hero. Others view her as a disgrace. Her siblings do not speak to her. Tito, the Federal Bureau of Investigation agent, wants nothing to do with her. Lucy, the Federal Bureau of Investigation translator, has cut all ties. The family reconciliation will likely never happen. Ana Belén Montes is free. However, her legacy is permanent. Today, at the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Ana Montes case is taught in counterintelligence training. New analysts learn about her methods and her motivations. They also learn about the red flags that were missed. They study the polygraph she beat and the ideology that drove her actions. The case study focuses on several key lessons. First, ideological spies are dangerous. They are not motivated by money, so financial monitoring does not catch them. They believe they are doing right, so they do not feel guilty. They are harder to detect and harder to turn. Second, polygraphs are not foolproof. Montes passed a polygraph in 1994. She used Cuban-taught countermeasures. The sphincter muscle technique worked effectively for her. Since her case, the intelligence community has improved polygraph procedures. However, countermeasures remain a problem. Third, behavioral indicators matter significantly. Montes expressed pro-Cuban views openly. Her colleagues noticed these views. A few reported their concerns. However, the reports did not trigger a serious investigation until years later. Today, the Defense Intelligence Agency emphasizes taking behavioral warnings seriously. Fourth, access should be limited. Montes had access to vast amounts of classified information. This was more than she needed for her job. She exploited that access. Today, the principle of need to know is enforced more strictly. Fifth, trust, but verify. Montes was brilliant, dedicated, and trusted. Nobody wanted to believe she could be a spy. That trust allowed her to operate for 16 years undetected. The Federal Bureau of Investigation also uses her case in training. They teach how to investigate a mole. They explain how to build a case without alerting the suspect. Training covers how to conduct covert searches. It also instructs on how to identify surveillance detection routes. Scott Carmichael, the Defense Intelligence Agency investigator who first suspected Montes, wrote a book about the case in 2007. The book was titled True Believer, detailing the investigation and capture of Ana Montes, Cuba's master spy. He describes the investigation in detail. He recounts the missed warnings. He highlights the gut feelings that proved correct. He also documents the painstaking surveillance that finally caught her. Carmichael retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2010. He is considered a hero within counterintelligence circles. He was the man who would not let go. He was also the man who caught the Queen of Cuba. Several books have been written about Montes. Jim Popkin released Codename Blue Wren in 2023. Scott Carmichael published True Believer in 2007. Matthew Connolly's book, The Insider Threat, from 2016, discusses her case among others. A documentary film titled Cuba, Traitor on the Inside, aired in 2013. It featured interviews with investigators, colleagues, and intelligence officials. The film portrays Montes as one of the most damaging spies in American history. The International Spy Museum in Washington, District of Columbia, features Montes in its exhibits. Her cipher sheet is on display. This sheet contains the handwritten code she used to decrypt Cuban intelligence messages. It serves as a physical artifact of her 16-year betrayal. At Central Intelligence Agency headquarters in Langley, Virginia, the memorial wall honors intelligence officers killed in the line of duty. It features 140 stars. Each star represents an officer who died serving the nation. None of the stars are specifically attributed to Ana Montes. However, intelligence officials believe that some of the officers she compromised may have died as a result. Cuba has never publicly acknowledged Montes' espionage. The country has never confirmed she worked for Cuban intelligence. It has never revealed what she passed. Cuba has also never identified her handlers. But in Cuba, intelligence professionals know her story. She is considered a hero there. She achieved a successful penetration of American intelligence. Montes was a spy who operated for 16 years without detection. She was an ideological true believer who risked everything for the revolution. The Cuban Intelligence Directorate almost certainly gave her a medal. It was likely the Hero of the Republic of Cuba, or a similar honor. The details of this award remain secret. Today, in 2025, Ana Montes is 68 years old. She is still living in Puerto Rico. She remains under federal supervision. Montes is still unrepentant. She believes she was right. The United States intelligence community believes she was one of the most damaging spies in American history. Both perspectives can be true. The Ana Montes case represents a different kind of espionage threat. She was not the mercenary spy selling secrets for money, nor was she the blackmailed spy coerced into betrayal. Instead, she was an ideological spy. She was a true believer. Montes was a person who genuinely thought she was doing the right thing by betraying her country. These spies are the hardest to detect. They do not show typical warning signs. There is no sudden wealth. There is no unexplained foreign travel. They have no desperate financial need. These individuals live normal lives. They are often highly competent at their jobs. They are passionate, dedicated, and trusted, and they are betraying everything. Ana Montes betrayed 450 intelligence officers. She compromised 4 undercover agents. Her actions jeopardized countless operations and a satellite program. She also revealed military plans, special forces operations, and strategic assessments. She did it for 16 years. She passed a polygraph. She fooled everyone, and she never felt guilty. That is the lesson. That is the warning. That is why her case is still taught today. Because somewhere in the intelligence community right now, there might be another Ana Montes. There might be another true believer. There might be another ideological spy who thinks they are serving a higher cause, and they are just as dangerous as she was. If this story mattered to you, please do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube's algorithm to show this story to more people. Stories like this do not get told unless people like you make them visible. Hit subscribe and click the notification bell. We are pulling stories like this from declassified archives. We also use court records and forgotten files every single week. These include real betrayals and real consequences. They also cover real people who paid the price for someone else's ideology. Drop a comment right now. Please tell me where you are watching from. Are you in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia? Perhaps you are in Latin America. This community is worldwide. Tell me if you work in intelligence or law enforcement. Tell me if someone in your family served during the Cold War. Or just type, "Never forget," so we know you're here. You are not just a viewer. You are part of making sure those 450 intelligence officers are not forgotten. You are part of making sure those 4 undercover agents are remembered. You are part of making sure Ana Montes' betrayal is documented as the cautionary tale it is. Our community is growing every day. Thousands of you come from dozens of countries. Every single one of you matters. One more thing. Please share this video. Text it to someone you know who is into Cold War history. Post it on Facebook. Tweet it. These stories deserve a bigger audience than they get. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure the people Ana Montes betrayed stay alive in memory. Thank you for making sure her story is remembered as the warning it is. These were not just operations. They were lives. You are helping us honor them. See you in the next story.